Okay, welcome everyone to our workshop today. Today we'll be talking about pathways to healing, trauma-informed counseling for newcomers. My name is Dr. Sandra Dixon. I am a registered psychologist in Alberta and also an associate professor at the University of Lethbridge. And Shelley?
My name is Shelley Scarlett. I'm a registered psychologist and I work in private practice.
And I'm Sophie Yohani. I'm a registered psychologist and professor of counseling psychology at the University of Alberta.
Sophia Parks, registered psychologist, and I work both in private practice and the University of Alberta.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll move on to the land acknowledgement.
Yes. So, as people of African descent living on Treaty 6 territory, we acknowledge that we live, learn, play, and work on the traditional lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Dene, and Nakota Sioux people, and the homeland of the Métis Nation Region 4. We recognize that we are all treaty people, those whose ancestors are indigenous to this land, those who came here as settlers, and those, like our African ancestors, who were brought here through the violence of the transatlantic slave trade. We honor the strength and the resilience of both Indigenous and Black communities who continue to shape this land with courage, creativity, and resistance. We carry deep gratitude for their teachings as we work towards equity, truth, and healing together.
Thank you, Shelley. So for our overview, this presentation aims to center the resilience, wellness, and coping strategies of newcomers to Canada amidst societal challenges. Drawing on research and reflexive exercises, we will address effective ways to facilitate the healing, hope, and resilience of newcomers. Sophia?
Hope is also to create a safer and brave space for attendees to participate in interactive learning, where they will increase their ability to identify and understand the impacts of xenoracism, which we will define later for you. And so we invite you to take a moment, a breath, a beat to arrive at our presentation. We invite you to take a moment to connect with your intention for being at this conference and the presentation, and a moment to acknowledge that there may be similarities in our journeys here today, and an invitation to make space for the differences in our journeys.
Thank you. Shelley?
So, my question, if you can put this in the chat and we'll give you a few seconds. What draws you to the topic of pathways to healing, trauma-informed counseling for newcomers? And what are you hoping to get from this interactive session? So we'll look at the chat and see what your responses are.
And so it's a quiet room so far today. So
Yes.
if you could hold those two questions in mind, and feel free to put something in the chat at a later time if that so moves you. And so we'll move on from here.
Thank you. Okay, so here we want to pause a little bit to speak about our positionality, and I'll start off the conversation. So I situate myself as a cisgender, able-bodied, heterosexual, Christian, Caribbean Canadian immigrant woman. And how I show up in this space is informed by the intersectionality of my identities and how I'm able to use the lens through which I am speaking to this topic. So just be mindful about your intersected identities and how you're showing up today in this space, and allow that to really inform how you're able to gravitate towards the discussions we're having and now you're able to participate as we move forward. So I'll turn it over to Sophia to talk about hers.
Mm-hmm. And so I was born on a small island close to the equator, which the indigenous Kalingo and Arawak peoples called Kayari Tobago, or land of the hummingbird and the tobacco pipe. In English, my island home is called Trinidad and Tobago. I call Treaty 6 my second home. I am also deeply spiritual and creative person. I'm a Christ follower. I sing in choirs. I dance to soca in my kitchen. And I can sit with friends and colleagues and clients of different religions or none, different sexual and gender orientations and beliefs with warmth, acceptance, and curiosity. I'm a psychologist grounded in somatic therapies, centering the wisdom of the body and body sensations and movement in my therapy. And I believe my life is a journey of acknowledging and holding in balance all of these realms.
Shelly?
Hi, I'm a first generation Canadian woman with roots in Jamaica. Even though I say roots, it feels kind of complicated because so much of my lineage was lost through slavery. So there's a whole part of my story that's untraceable and unnamed. So I don't know the tribe or the land my ancestors originally came from, only that they survived. And because of that, I'm here. So being Jamaican Canadian means I've always lived in two worlds, a world at home where I was surrounded with warmth, humor, the rhythm of Caribbean culture through the lens of my mother and my grandmother. And there was food, there was food and music, and we had community. But outside that space, in the land that I was born in Canada, Treaty 6 land, I often had to learn how to belong in a world that didn't always see where I came from. So much of my identity has been translating myself, making sense of who I am in spaces that sometimes expect me to choose part of my story over another. So that in between space has shaped how I relate to others and how I show up. It's taught me to listen deeply and to hold curiosity, to understand that everyone carries both visible and invisible histories. So when I connect with people, I don't just see them in the present moment, I see generations before them and generations after them, the generations that hold resilience, kind of grief, survival, thrive. And in that beauty, there might not be any words, but I can hold that space. So for me, being here in this body, in this time, is an act of reclamation for me. Like I carry my ancestors, even though I don't know their names, I speak their names, and I try to live in a way that honors them through strength while also allowing myself to have the freedom to be soft, curious, and fully human. And so I hold gratitude and awareness and connection. So I'm so glad to hold this space with all of you as we learn together.
Thank you, Shirley. So my name is Sophie Yohani, as I mentioned earlier, and I'm a first generation immigrant living here in Amiskwacis-Waskaigan, also known as Edmonton in Alberta. And this year marks my 30th year here. And that's a long time, even though it also feels very short. I was born and raised in Tanzania to a British mother and Tanzanian father. I was born specifically in the region of Tanzania called Kilimanjaro, which many of you will know, and that's the ancestral home of my father's people. I came to Canada as a graduate student, actually, initially, and then laid down roots here. Um, and My journey of becoming aware of that migration process and experiences of immigrants, of course, is my own, but also within the first year of arriving in Canada as a graduate student training in psychology, I became really concerned that the people that I'm working with didn't so much reflect my own, maybe bicultural background, my own background as an international person who's migrated, and immediately was connected to an immigrant serving organization in the city that I live in, and have always been connected and working with immigrant communities because that is also my own experience um, of having to kind of build from the ground up, not having family here and creating family in this city. So I have two children, and I also have two stepchildren, so four with my partner. And I'm happy to be here and again just locate myself from the positionality as immigrant today. Thank you.
Thank you. I see we do have some action going on in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Look at that.
Sandra, would you like me to read out
Sure, thank you.
what some
That's
people
great.
have said?
Thank you.
Yes. There have been some points about getting some learning tips and best practices when it comes to interacting with vulnerable populations. Also, a great point about healing leads to releasing what is stuck and creates forward momentum in a healthy way. Love that. Someone is excited to learn more about how to integrate this framework more intentionally in their personal and professional space. Some good morning welcomes from folks, as well as someone who's not a counselor, but supervises counselors at a community health center for cultural communities and is looking to build their knowledge to be able to support those counselors, and also trauma-informed tips and best practices to support clients in navigating Canadian space. Lovely, folks. Thank you so much for your input in the chat. You have found the right place. We will be working on all of those points today.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Sophia. Okay, let's get going.
Okay, so very quickly, I'm just going to kind of situate our conversation today by grounding us in the topic, which focuses on newcomers, and so of course, we just want to kind of situate some key points here, including the fact that when we talk about newcomers, we're talking about migrants to Canada within the last 10 years. And so that's the sort of the standard definition that we're using, even though some people will talk about within 5 years, but we're kind of extending that to within the first 10 years because we know that it takes time to actually settle and integrate and begin our process of connecting and experiencing a new homeland. Newcomers are the fastest growing segment of the Canadian market, but are often poorly served also because they are very not well understood, and that we have different categories of newcomers, as many of you in this space would be familiar with, ranging from people who come as refugees to international students to skilled workers, people uniting with their families, and those seeking a better quality of life, escaping persecution, asylum seekers. So as you know, there's multiple pathways in which people enter Canada. This matters because understanding newcomers' needs would improve service delivery, support integration and community relationships. And that's why this matters. And I'm just going to the next slide. And so ideally, we would like to imagine that this country is always welcoming and that when people arrive, feel embraced and are settling into a new place as they might have imagined or we had imagined when first arriving. But we know that is not always the case. And so because our focus here is on trauma and resilience and healing, I want to talk a little bit about some of the structural violence that interpersonal and structural violence that newcomers may experience primarily racism and xenophobia. So as you're familiar with, probably xenophobia is the fear of people who you don't know, or foreigners. But as we know that um, the trend or the large over the years, the trend in Canada um, shifted from migrants coming primarily from Western European countries to countries from the global South, which means that majority of newcomers to Canada are racialized and encounter racism. But also, we know that we have individuals who are newcomers to Canada who are not necessarily coming from Western European countries, but are coming from other European countries where they are white. And so xenoracism is an important concept to think about when individuals who are newcomers, regardless of their skin colors, experience that sense of not being welcomed. And I want to share this really powerful kind of definition of xenoracism that actually uh, came from an author who was situated in the UK, but it talks about what was happening in the turn of the century, in the millennium, where experiences of xenoracism was starting to rise and anti sort of immigrant sentiment. So a racism that is not just directed at those with darker skins from the former colonial territories, but at the newer categories of the displaced, the dispossessed, and the uprooted, who are beating at the Western Europe's doors, the Europe that helped to displace them in the first place. It is racism that is, and that cannot be color-coded, directed, as it is at poor whites as well, and is therefore passed off as xenophobia, a natural fear of strangers. But in the way it denigrates and refies people before segregating and or expelling them, it is xenophobia that bears all the marks of the old racism. It is a racism in substance, but xeno in form. It is a racism that is meted out to impoverished strangers, even if they're white. It is xeno-racism. And I think this definition allows us to think about racism, where people might experience racism because of the color of the skin, but also that othering and that the power differences that can happen just because you are a newcomer, regardless of your background. So moving back to racialized groups, in Canada, racialized groups, including immigrants, actually experience significantly more discrimination and unfair treatment compared to non-racialized groups. And so Statistics Canada would say that reporting from a research on recent research reports from Stats Canada, racialized groups, including immigrants, reported at least 51% of them reported experiencing discrimination compared to 27% of individuals who were, let's say, racialized individuals who are living in who are born and raised in Canada. So individuals experiencing discrimination, we also know that has significant impacts on their mental health and their life satisfaction, meaning and purpose in life, and a sense of belonging to the community. So you can see that experiences of being othered or being mistreated because of who you are, the color of your skin, or your migration status or background, can have a significant impact at the sense of who you are at a deep level. And so it's beyond just perhaps maybe experiencing maybe anxiety. It affects a sense of meaning and purpose and overall life satisfaction. And this is why we thought this important that we kind of really have a conversation around this and ways for healing related to this, because this is really critical.
Thanks, Sophie. And so building on that, it's important for us to look at racial trauma within the context of the DSM-5. And we see that currently in the DSM-5, there is a limitation in terms of how racial trauma is conceptualized or not conceptualized at this time. So it doesn't really fully capture the impact of racial trauma. What it does, it gives us a definition of PTSD, which is quite different from racial trauma. So I think that is one thing we are hoping that there'll be a shift in terms of how the DSM-5 is able to create a conceptualization of racial trauma, specifically because it has significant impact on the lived experiences of newcomers. We see that a lot of newcomers post-migration, they experience a significant amount of stressors. And so some of these ongoing stressors relate to racism, discrimination, microaggressions, and intergenerational trauma, which can also contribute to mental health issues. And some of those issues might include PTSD, symptoms consistent with depression, anxiety, and so forth. So it's really important for us to think about not only racial trauma in terms of its impact on the lived experiences of newcomers, but also some of the mental health stressors that they also encounter given their impact around racial trauma. So when we think of intergenerational trauma, this is considered to be trauma that is passed down through generations, impacting individuals in complex ways. And epigenetic is one concept to consider in terms of how trauma can be experienced within one's gene and can be passed on from generation to generation. So someone who is of African descent, although they might not personally have gone through, the slave trade impact because of their ancestors and because of the genetic predisposition of that, they're still being impacted by the traumatic experience today. So it's really important for us to think of racial trauma and intergenerational trauma in a broader context. This is important when you think of the clinical context as well, because when you're working with, newcomers, specifically individuals of who are Black Canadians, there might be clinical judgment that is put against them just because people might not fully understand that they're also impacted by racial trauma as well. So having a good understanding of intergenerational trauma and racial trauma is going to be really important in how you're able to then deliver effective service and support to these individuals, and not only say Black Canadians per se, but also many other newcomers who are also impacted by different forms of trauma post-migration. Shelley?
So as you can see, there's so many words on the slide, and I just want you to notice what word pops up for you at first. And so before I begin, I want to start to show you two images after this word slide. So just take a moment. And so can you show the next slide, please? So please take a moment to look at this first image and notice what happens inside when you read those words. So in the chat, and I'm also going to ask the presenters as well, without overthinking, type one word that captures your immediate reaction. It might be a thought, a feeling, or a body sensation. So I'm going to ask presenters, what is the word that popped up for you when you saw this image? One word.
For me, it's othering.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Me,
seeing
anger.
something. Anger. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
And I'm noticing some words: superiority, belongingness, frustration. It makes it feel like, is my English not clear enough? Assumptions, annoyance. Wow. There's a lot that's popping up for people. Curiosity. And so let's go to the second image and let the shift land. So just notice this full image, notice the woman, this image. Notice how the tone feels different. So what changes for you in this version, this image? And just type one word, describe how that image lands for you.
In the chat, people are putting frustration, curiosity, yikes, disbelief, ignorance, pushy, feels
Mhm.
interrogative, insensitive.
Yeah, yeah. So what we are experiencing right now is the experience of microaggression. They can sound soft and curious, or they can land as sharp and demanding. But the message underneath is always the same. You don't belong. You're not from here. Explain yourself. And for many racialized people, especially newcomers, this is one of the first microaggressions they encounter in Canada. I wanted to begin with these images because microaggressions are often hidden in everyday comments. They're easily dismissed, but their emotional impact is real. So, what are microaggressions? Microaggressions are subtle, everyday comments or behaviors that communicate a bias or a prejudice towards a marginalized group. Most are unintentional, but the intent does not erase the impact. Dr. Chester Pierce, an African American psychiatrist at Harvard, described microaggressions as subtle, stunning, often automatic, and nonverbal exchanges, which are put downs. They're hidden in everyday conversations, sometimes even inside compliments. So, next slide. So, understanding microaggressions. So, microaggressions land differently for newcomers because they interact with identity, culture, expectation, and belonging. And so, here are some reasons they can feel confusing and disorientating. So, in many countries, race is not the main identity marker. Identity is rooted in your tribe, your caste, your religion, your region, and or class. So a newcomer might not immediately interpret subtle racism as racism. And in Canada, racism is wrapped in politeness. It's framed as curiosity with a gentle tone or friendly questions, but the subtlety creates doubt and internal confusion. You know, some newcomers might think, was that racism? Am I overreacting? Am I being too sensitive? Or maybe I misunderstood. And this constant self questioning is a part of the emotional toll that takes place. And when you're new to a country or a job or an institution, speaking up can be very risky. The fear of being labeled as ungrateful or angry or difficult sometimes leads people to just be silent about their experiences. So, in the chat, I wonder if you could say yes or no. Have you ever questioned your own reaction to a comment that was made? I have, right here. And I've asked myself, am I being ridiculous? Am I being oversensitive? Was that person being racist? And so I can't imagine how that is when you're constantly questioning yourself. So, next slide. So, why are microaggressions hurtful? You know, I think for newcomers, microaggressions collide with the process of settling and adapting and navigating to their identity and their identity to in their new country. Many newcomers come from places where their credentials were respected, their professionalism wasn't questioned, their accent wasn't commented on, and their belonging felt secure. So when microaggressions occur, the emotional impact is intense. Sometimes they feel shocked, like, is this happening in Canada, the land of opportunity, this mosaic where they're supposed to be acceptance? Like kind of confusion, like why am I being othered? Why am I being treated differently? identity disruption. Who am I in this new context, in this country? How do people view me? And silencing as well. I don't want to seem angry or ungrateful or questioning. And there's long-term impacts to that because over time, it can lead to racial trauma, stress, exhaustion, hypervigilance, withdrawal, and chronic self-doubt. It's not an isolated incident, it's a pattern. Um, Next slide. So, common microaggressions experienced by newcomers. And these microaggressions appear across workplace, healthcare, community spaces, and daily interactions. So, assumptions of inferiority or foreignness. Examples, your English is so good.
Mm.
Where are you really from? Speaking slowly or loudly, assuming they don't understand the Canadian landscape and expressing surprise at competency or fluency. And so the message that is sent is you're not one of us, you're less capable, and you don't belong. So professional and intellectual dismissal. So overlooking foreign credentials. You don't have the Canadian experience, so you don't understand. Assuming that newcomers lack leadership or professionalism and expecting people to start from the bottom despite advanced qualifications.
Mm.
And so, what might be the impact of that? The impact is your expertise doesn't count unless it's Canadian. You must work twice as hard to be seen as equal. And so I kind of want to land here a little bit because in my personal family, my mother came during the 1970s scoop when they needed nurses. And they went to the Caribbean and brought these nurses. And my mom was an advanced nurse. And when she came here, her experience changed. She never identified herself as a Black woman, but everywhere she went, everyone was like, "You're Black, you're Black, you're Black." And she never understood that. She's like, "I'm Yvonne. Why isn't people saying my name?" And she experienced that she had to work harder and she had advanced qualifications. And it was just it was difficult for her. And so when I was born, we have this statement in some Black communities: love your sons and educate your daughters. I was always educated that I had to be better than my Canadian and white counterparts. I never could rest. And that became an intergenerational trauma that was passed down. And it continued to be passed down where excellence was just the bare minimum in our family. And that was a survival technique. And so now, with that, I had to change the story to get into thrive. So the impact lands and it gets passed on from generation to generation if it's not stopped. So the next slide, stereotyping and exoticizing. Your accent is cute. Your food smells interesting. You must love spicy food. This was said to me recently. You must love spicy food, being Black and all. And touching of their hair and being evasive with questions about their culture and religion. And the message that's sent there is you're foreign, you are an other. You're not a person, you're an other. And so we get to ask these invasive questions, not respecting your boundaries, not respecting your personhood. So the tokenism and cultural curiosity, asking one person to represent an entire culture, turning cultural holidays into performative moments, expecting newcomers to educate others on racism and equity. And so the message there is you're a symbol, not an individual. So these messages are saying you'll never fully belong. no matter what you do. These messages are very impactful. So, with that, after kind of exploring what the impact that microaggressions have on newcomers from an emotional and psychological perspective, we're ready to move to the next section of our presentation of coping, resilience, and healing. So I'll pass it on to my colleague who will take us through that part of our learning journey.
Thank you.
I really appreciate this slide, which is by Dr. Marie S. Desilek, and it is the window of tolerance. Window of tolerance was developed by Dr. Dan Siegel to describe how our nervous system responds to trauma, different difficult situations in our life. As Shali mentioned, microaggressions can lead to people constantly self-questioning their judgment, the way they're seeing the world, and speaking up about what they're feeling can feel very risky. And what that could look like. And so the yellow section of this slide is the comfort zone. It is feeling emotionally regulated, calm, cool, collected, and connected to self and others, ability to self-soothe and ability to regulate. So this is at the beginning of our presentation, I invited people to pause, check in with themselves, to take a breath. Hopefully it got you into your regulated section of your window of tolerance. The section above is hyperarousal, also called hyperactivation of the nervous system. It includes anxiety, feeling overwhelmed. There may be outbursts or emotional or aggressive outbursts, anger, aggression, rage, some obsessive thoughts, sometimes obsessive behavior. This is a fight and flight response to a difficult situation that people feel like they cannot get out of. Sophie mentioned that newcomers, they're losing everything's changing, their meaning, their purpose, loss of their support systems change, a loss of sense of home and life satisfaction. That is very disorienting. It is all encompassing. And then there is the freeze response, the hypoarousal, which can include dissociation, not feeling present, being on autopilot almost, memory loss, difficulty in concentrating, feeling disconnected, flat affect, and separation from self and feelings and emotions. Both the hyperactivation and the hypoarousal or hypoactivation are ways of coping with an impossible situation. And Sandra mentioned that racial trauma is not captured in the DSM-5, and it can overlap with generalized anxiety, can overlap with depression, and also somatization of difficulties. So some newcomers might complain of, my chest feels tight, it feels hard to breathe, or their heart is pumping really fast, or continual stomach upset, for example, or sore body aches and pains. This could be that hyper or hypoarousal, because the situation they're in feels untenable.
Mhm.
Let's see. So, and we've covered microaggressions very well, and we've also covered the difficulties with being in a new place that is not accepting. What can help people stay in their window of tolerance? Well, there is mindful moments. So some people think of mindfulness as you need to be meditating, but just being present in this moment. If you're having a meal with family, really being present and maybe not thinking about work and the million and one things that people have to do to survive out there in the world. But just listening to other members of the family. So being mindful in the here and the now, grounding exercises, something I work with quite a few newcomers, and something that I do in my work is teaching them how to ground themselves, teaching them how to be aware of this hyperactivation and the hypoactivation, and how to take a breath and land and be present in their this moment. Also, techniques for self-soothing, tapping into what helps people feel resourced. Is it their faith community? Is it getting together with people in their community to cook or listen to music? Or, like I said with myself, I dance to soca in my kitchen as I cook. What helps people feel resourced and helps them feel connected to their culture? Um, uh, and let's see, what else could I say about this? Um, and really affirming, uh, when being really affirming when people talk about, their struggles or feeling those microaggressions, not telling them that, oh, are you sure that happened? Just acknowledging, yeah, I believe you. Oh, that must have been so difficult. I'm sorry that happened. Helping people feel seen and heard and feel like they are, not imagining what is going on with them. Next slide, please.
I wonder if we have any comments in the chat.
Oh, yes.
We'll move on. I know we'd asked a question earlier. Shall we
Mhm.
get in the chat before we jump to
No,
the
there's nothing in the chat, just great visual,
okay.
which
Okay,
we really appreciate that.
thank you. Okay, let's go to the next slide.
And so we've touched on bits and pieces of this already. Let's shift towards, the coping, the surviving, the resilience, and the healing. And so, one thing we can do as supporters of newcomers is recognize that people have many ways of coping and not being judgmental about that. Sometimes folks cannot say or do anything in the moment. That's the freeze response. It's not safe. And so turning to them and saying, well, why didn't you say something? Really isn't appropriate. And like I mentioned, not judging the way that people cope. They're doing the best they can at the time. And no, acknowledging that there's a range of ways that people can respond. Sometimes it's hyperactivation with the fight and flight response, and sometimes it's hypoactivation with freeze, or some another level we don't often talk about within the window of tolerance is the fawn, please and appease. So folks trying to appease people that are doing the microaggressions towards them. And so being in community, as I mentioned, can be nourishing. From my grandmother's hands, a wonderful book by Resma Manikim from 2017 talks about the benefit of movement, cooking together, clapping, drumming, shaking, gardening, getting your hands in the soil. And so all of those different um, strategies can be really helpful in reducing the hyperactivation and getting people um, resourcing them so they move out of a freeze response into more of a comfort zone where they are able to cope and self-soothe. So some interactive questions. Feel free to put your responses in the chat. One, what coping mechanisms and tools do you see newcomers use in your work or you have experienced in your own communities? What are some examples of coping in your communities, and how if this feels safe enough, how have you coped in the face of microaggressions, bias, racism, and intergenerational trauma? As we have mentioned, we are trying to create a safe enough space for you to be able to comment on things, but please monitor your own nervous system. And if it doesn't feel like this is a good time to comment, feel free not to. But feel free to jot down your notes that you want to reflect on later. So I'll make some space for that. Mm. Mm-hmm. Jolly, my colleague, says, I see the sharing of stories through sharing of food and language and community. Yes. Mm-hmm. And oh, silence or saying they don't speak English. Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. Very true. Very true. Ah, mutual support, reaching out to members of the community who can relate, and debriefing goes a very long way. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And employment. Yeah. Affinity groups. I love it when organizations have affinity groups or smaller groups for certain social identities to provide support. Yeah. Yes, I'm seeing the theme here is community, community, community. Yes. Reaching out. Lovely. Mm.
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And sometimes folks, as Marie mentioned, sometimes newcomers resort to sticking within their ethnic communities and avoiding others. Yeah. And for some, that is where they feel safer uh, for now. And that might take years to feel a little bit safer in other communities. Lovely. Thank you so much. Next slide, please, Sandra. Yeah. And so resiliency, the ability to withstand trauma and turmoil and be able to proceed with living and engaging in a productive life. I love that quote by Renee Linklater. Um, and Resma Manikin, this is a paraphrase, is our ability to heal, just like our ability to heal, resilience is part of human nature. It is as much part of us as our ability to heal. The positive effects of resilience can ripple and change not only individuals, but families, communities, and neighborhoods. Resilience extends from the individual to the collective, from surviving to thriving, and resilience can be understood at the individual level, the family level, community, and nation. And really, I believe that's why we are all here, is to learn tools and strategies and information to help impact on a positive level the individuals we work with, the families we work with, the communities we work with, and therefore create hopefully a healthier and stronger nation.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, so here we're going to be looking at some ways that you can cultivate wellness with newcomers. So we're hoping that you'll be able to take something tangible to move forward with in your learning today. So a key concept that I want you to reflect on in your work with newcomers is integrity. And we see integrity as a way of being, something connected to one's values and priorities, and it also informs their life decisions. So, what might be some way that you can help to enhance the integrity of newcomers and really allow them to tap into their sense of being and into their value system is going to be really important, because by so doing, you're really allowing them to think about what are some best decisions for them, especially post-migration. Resistance is also another key concept. And we view this as opposing aspects of society. So we see this as really allowing newcomers and helping them to facilitate this idea of opposing different ideologies and different, ways of thinking as they sort of navigate this new environment that they're in. Because oftentimes the new environment or new Canadian society, the views and values do not align with their value system or their well-being, hence leading to mental health issues like we talked about earlier. So part of our responsibility here in really allowing them to cultivate resistance is to join in their efforts to end racism, or also to adopt a lifestyle that allows more time for relaxation. And we see that oftentimes resistance can be seen as a source of strength that we can actually use to help us move into that relaxation state. Workaholism is also something for us to think about, because we see that as a Western value. And I think Shelley spoke to the idea that oftentimes when newcomers come to Canada, they need to work twice as hard to get to where they want to go. And so part of what we're saying is, how do we push back against this idea of, workaholism, which is westernized, and allow newcomers to really sit with the reality that they can actually resist this ideology and really embrace something that creates more balance for them, which is really tying into what Sophia talked about in how do we find that medium and help them to find that medium is important. It's also important for us to recognize that some systems are developed to create oppression, and that often the oppression they create is invisible. That could also tie into the microaggression that we talk about. Sometimes it's not really very overt, it's very covert. So really allowing ourselves to really help newcomers decipher what might be happening beneath the surface is important to both the oppressed and also both the oppressor. So really allowing them to make that distinction is going to be important as they sort of navigate this new environment and think about what are some of the mental health challenges that they are encountering as well. Because sometimes I think even for newcomers, they can slip into the oppressor phase without even knowing it. So having those conversations and being very transparent about it will sort of help them decipher what might be happening for them. Community connection is important. And so that's a point that Sophia talked about. But I really want to spend a little bit more time unpacking this a little bit, because I think oftentimes in the Western culture, the emphasis is on the me, myself, and I. And so I really want us to think about a paradigm shift where we're thinking about a collective. When we begin to think about we, us, and ours. So really having that sort of collectivistic ideology is important as we shift from self-care to self-wellness, right? So how do we then take care of ourselves and others together versus looking at how do I just focus on myself and my self-care? Because I think when we talk about self-care, it takes a focus off the systemic issues that are at play in terms of how those might be impacting the wellness and well-being of newcomers. So thinking about the I stance versus the we stance, and the self-care stance versus self-wellness stance, I think is really important for us to begin to explore and conceptualize differently or reconceptualize differently as we move forward. Boundary management is also important. And oftentimes we see that newcomers are expected to go beyond white peers and that is called the diversity tax. So again, having to do more, having to prove themselves. And oftentimes, even that is not enough because they're still seen as less than from that standpoint. So we need to teach newcomers how to articulate their needs and wants while simultaneously honoring their rights and their preferences, and also really enhancing and honoring their values as well. So one way we can actually go about that is to help them set compassionate boundaries. And by so doing, what we're really inviting newcomers to do is to be able to lean in to certain experiences that they feel comfortable doing, and also lean out of those experiences as a way to protect their own self-wellness and self mental health as they move forward as well. So be able to do that, and to do that well in a way that's not going to impede their own psychological functioning and overall development. And lastly is cultural fit. And so here is where you're embracing cultural traditions and realities. And again, oftentimes when newcomers come, the idea is to assimilate and to forget that part of identity pre-migration. And so what we're asking and challenging you to do is to think about how do we find ways to allow them to be able to combine both those cultural traditions that they have with their new realities in Canada, and to really take part in whether it's cultural healing circles. Sophia talked about cultural dances, gardening, reclaiming old family recipes. Really helping newcomers to embrace their cultural identity is going to be really important as they navigate these sort of in-between spaces when they come to Canada. So these are really important for us to think about as well. Another key concept that I think is important for us to reflect on as we think about newcomers and cultivating wellness with them is joy. And that's one word that seemed to have a negative connotation, but I'm hoping that we can begin to see joy in a very positive, uplifting, resilience way. And one way to think about joy, especially when you're talking about newcomers, is to really tap into their creativity. So their creative expression is important, and really finding a way to recharge their battery. Oftentimes, they're doing multiple tasks, taking on multiple responsibilities, wearing multiple hats. And so, really finding time, pausing to think about what joy might look like, whether it is just breathing or whether it's connecting with family, in their home country, whatever that might look like. However, they can recharge their battery to just keep go another day is going to be really important as well, and not to, lead to burnout, especially when they're encountering issues like racial trauma, racism, microaggression on a daily basis. It can be emotionally exhausting. So finding joy in the simplest things and seeing glimmers of hope is going to be really important. Creativity through art might also be a way for them to de-stress as well, and to be able to think about problem solving, to think about being able to manage negativity, also being able to tackle all those internalized messages that they're getting on a daily basis as well. So whatever art form might look like for them, whether it's even, doing art with their children, or doing poetry, or, one thing that I do artistically is I write poems. I also journal as well. So even, journaling, whatever that might look like, a gratitude journaling and stuff, something for you to explore with as well is important. And tapping into the joy aspect of it as well, embracing joy can also help to lead to generational healing. So if that's a key mechanism for us to be able to use to create wellness with newcomers as well, it's something for us to explore for sure. It's also important to think about how do we begin to embrace curiosity with newcomers, be gentle in the way we're asking questions and in our inquiry, and also really normalizing their confusion. And that is really, it's understandable that coming to a new country, sometimes they may not really understand certain things or be concerned about certain things or be confused about certain things. And that in itself can be very othering. So part of her responsibility is to really normalize that what you're experiencing, what you're feeling, it's very normal, especially in, today's context. So really normalizing it is going to also be humanizing for them as well, and give them a language in which to express themselves and articulate their experiences. So one question to think about experimenting with is, how did that comment land for you? So really just checking in with them gently, getting their perspective, validating their experiences is going to be really important. And also just really reinforcing agency. And that's a really big thing that sometimes we neglect to do, is allowing newcomers to really understand that they have a sense of agency and autonomy over their experiences and over their lived realities. And impact is what matters. And so sometimes we say things without not knowing the impact it's going to have. So really, sometimes the impact is what matters, not the actual intent of what we are trying to say. So how do we make sure that we are using, education in a way that's going to be, really meaningful, whether that be sharing resources on issues around racism, microaggression, having really candid conversations with newcomers once they come to Canada is going to be really important, and just really being open and transparent. And a key part of that sense of agency is to really acknowledge when we've made, mistakes, and to take responsibility and accountability for our actions, and be willing to say we're sorry, and be willing to listen to their listening, understand their understanding, and really hear their hearing is going to be also important as well as we move forward in really cultivating a sense of wellness and care for our newcomers. Thank you. So on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Sophie.
All right. Thank you very much, Sandra. So I'm hoping by now you realize that we've been providing you with a huge basket of resources and information that can be used to really support healing, a resilience, and an agency of newcomers as they integrate into a new homeland, but also grounded in the realities of where they might encounter stresses, challenges, and even traumas for the first time, or ongoing or cumulative trauma. Much of what we have talked about today, personally, I believe falls within what I call within liberation psychology practices, which is an approach to psychology that emerges from the global South. It came out of a critique of sort of Euro-Western approaches to thinking about mental health and healing practices that don't fit for all groups of people. But liberation psychology, with some of its roots, for example, in Latin America, um, really responded to this idea of the importance of becoming conscious and aware of the realities of our everyday experiences. And so by having, for example, Shirley share with us about microaggression, for us to talk about xenoracism, yes, that's hard and trauma, but that is the realities that exist that we need to be conscious of in order to know how to heal and move forward and implement the suggestions and recommendations that Sophia and Sandra have shared with us. One critical component of liberation psychology is this idea of reviving what we call historical memory. The importance of being able to kind of go back and fetch those elements of what we know to be true, the wisdoms, the practices that were very helpful for us in the past, and how we can implement them here in this new context. And so drawing on the Ghanaian concept of Sankofa, and this is the image, the bird, this is the Sankofa bird. Sankofa is a tree word from one of the groups in ethnic groups in Ghana called the the Tree people. Sorry, it's a tree word. Yes, there might be some people here who are familiar with this, but in Ghana, it literally means go back and fetch. And again, as I mentioned, it's that idea of going back and picking something that's important from your history. The bird is picking up an egg, a golden egg. And so for us to come as we get close to the end of our time together, I would like you to just think about maybe something that you could take with you, or even put a few ideas in the chat here. What are some of the forms of individual and collective healing that you have witnessed, that you are familiar with from your culture, your backgrounds, your family? What or who has helped you on your healing journey? What qualities of healing do you want passed down to future generations? And what do you want healed on behalf of past generations? These are critical concepts. These are critical questions that allow you to really reflect and go back and fetch what you know to be true. One of the things that I've often observed as a therapist working with newcomers is sometimes in the midst of all the work and challenges, or the work of adjusting to a new life, we forget what we knew about ourselves that was really important. And sometimes that could be because of the traumas, the microaggressions, the experience of not belonging, othering. And so this is an invitation to go back, to fetch, to remember, to revive. And you can do that in various ways, as was mentioned by Sandra in the previous slides: creatively, journaling, reflecting, whatever expression that you use that will allow you to go back to kind of revive those practices that you knew that were good and healing. So this is what we have here as an invitation. And I see that some people are kind of already starting to fill in the chat here. So remember, again, it's an invitation for you to go back and remember what is really important for you. So we're going to go back. We're going to continue to the next slide. And again, just a few final reminders here before we close is that ultimately, the implication of what we're sharing with you here is the importance of moving beyond survival and even resilience to thriving in a new homeland. We want to support newcomers to ultimately thrive. And thrive, it's not just about, as we said, it's not just about coping and dealing with what's in front of you. That's important. But beyond that, it's about finding ways to reinvent who we are and to grow. As humans, we are meant to continue to grow. We're not meant to just remain where we're at or return to where we were at before. It's about becoming better versions of ourselves. And so this is and ultimately, a lot of what we're recommending and supporting you with here is to lean towards helping newcomers and their families to thrive. If you're not a newcomer and you are working with newcomers, it's about being invited to be an ally. If you are welcomed by a community or an organization to work with them, to support them in the work that they do with newcomers, that is an allyship that we hope that you can take seriously and commit to supporting and working with you walking alongside the communities that are dealing with specific issues and helping to kind of advocate with them around accessing the supports that they need in order for them to move towards thriving. It's about cultural humility. It's about if you're engaging in activism, it's about non-performative activism. It's really that idea of really working from a place that is grounded in a sense of your own locationality and also, again, with a focus on supporting the thriving of communities. Awareness of settler colonialism. This is critical. We began with a land acknowledgement, and this is because recognizing that the focus here is on migrants and newcomers, it is also about the importance of recognizing the context of this land, the relationship between the government and Indigenous communities, and our role as newcomers or people who work with newcomers or supporting newcomers in continuing to work towards creating equity and inclusion in this land. And ultimately, it's about dismantling xenoracism. What we have here on this screen are some lovely screenshots of books that are critical, I think, in supporting young people to thrive from a young age. We think about children. We didn't talk specifically about the experiences of newcomer children, but because we're talking broadly here. But one way to support young children in remaining connected to a sense of who they are and their identity is through what we call bibliotherapy in psychology. And I've always had this love of actually collecting books that reflect the children that I work with, or that reflect my own children and my communities. And so we have here some examples of books that you can look up, and there's so many. This is a beautiful time that we live in right now, and that there are more. When my children were younger, if when I was young, it was very hard to find these books. And so it's really exciting that we can find, we have those right now. The next slide, please. What we leave you here now with is some of the resources that were mentioned in our presentation today, My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa Menakem, Renee Linklater's Decolonizing Trauma Work, excellent book, Decolonizing Therapy by Jennifer Mulan, and The Pain We Carry, Healing from Complex PTSD for People of Color. So we leave you with some of our favorite books and invite you to explore further this topic that we shared with you today. So on that note, we will thank you, and I believe we'll just open up for some questions that we have before we close here in the next 5 minutes. Somebody asked to see the Sankofa slide again, so we're just gonna reverse that so that
So we can
yes.
maybe check in with about the questions now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody says the interactive activity remind me of the late Murray Sinclair, chair of the TRC. He mentioned that when we are listening to stories from residential school survivors, he would make sure to smudge, lean on elders, and prepare his family to support him at home in doing his important work. Thank you, Sonia.
Mhm. And can we go back to the book suggestion?
Okay, it looks like people want to see the resources. Esther, yes, so we'll just pull those up for you to see while I kind of look at that here. If there are any questions.
I also believe that our presentation, including the pictures, Sandra, will be posted after the conference.
It's
Do you
already
remember?
posted, I believe.
It's already posted?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It'll be posted.
So you should be able to, you should have been able to access it before today's presentation. If not, just reach out to the organizer, or maybe Chad could let us know how they can access that.
It's under the Files tab. Thank you, Esther.
Thank you.
Okay.
Do we have any takers on the questions that we asked earlier?
Well, here's a question. If an organization wants to present this research awareness about, racism to newcomers, who can they contact?
Sorry, what was the question?
The question was, if an organization wants to present this research awareness about xenoracism to newcomers, who can they contact? That's
Okay.
from Fatima.
How can they contact us?
Yeah, I think did we have our contact information on
I think we did.
at the
On the
beginning?
first slide, you should be able
Yeah,
We
to
do.
you should be able to contact us. Yeah, for sure. If you have any questions.
I'm not sure if we actually put our, no, it
Oh,
wasn't there.
no, we did not. Okay,
Not.
good to know.
We could why don't we just put it in the, why don't we
Yeah.
maybe have one contact person, and then they could reach out to them, and then we could, Sophie, do you want to put your contact in the
Sure.
chat?
I'll just
And
put my
yeah,
contact. It's my contact is also on the conference website.
Oh,
If you
Yep.
yes.
look me up as a
Bio.
presenter, our
Yep.
bios have our contacts, but I'll just put my email
Yes.
here
Yeah.
as
Yes, our
the
contact, if you look at our bios, our contacts are there as well. So thank you for that
Mhm.
question.
yeah, I've got that there. Okay.
Great.
Okay. Thanks everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for just showing up
Mm,
and having this learning journey with us.
Mhm.
thank you.
Thanks for being here.